We will never seek a nuclear bomb. Iran's new president reaches out to the West. Hassan Rouhani says he has full authority to negotiate a deal. A sign of thawing relations or more diplomatic deception? This is Inside Story. Hello there, welcome to the programme. I'm Shuli Ghosh. Iranian President Hassan Rouhani has insisted that his country will never seek a nuclear bomb. His comments come just days before Rouhani attends the United Nations General Assembly in New York. That will mark his first appearance as president on the world stage. His words have now got Western leaders wondering whether Iran is ready to take a more moderate line over its disputed nuclear programme. Or is it subtle manoeuvring to avoid further sanctions? Speaking to a US television network at his presidential compound in Tehran, Rouhani spoke of subtle and tiny steps.
We have never pursued or sought a nuclear bomb, and we are not going to do so. In its nuclear program, this government enters with full power and has complete authority. I have given the nuclear negotiations portfolio to the Foreign Ministry. The problem won't be from our side. We have sufficient political latitude to solve this problem. President Obama wrote a letter to me. In that letter, he congratulated my election, and some issues of his interest were raised in that letter. From my point of view, the tone of the letter was positive and constructive. It could be subtle and tiny steps for a very important future.
Well, Washington gave this reaction to Rouhani's comments. A White House statement said, "We hope that this new Iranian government will engage substantively in order to reach a diplomatic solution that will fully address the international community's concerns about Iran's nuclear program. We remain ready to engage with the Rouhani government on the basis of mutual respect to achieve a peaceful solution to the nuclear issue." Well, in a further gesture ahead of Rouhani's visit to New York, Iran has released a dozen political prisoners. They include prominent human rights lawyer Nasrin Sotoudeh, who defended opposition activists. She was sentenced to 6 years in prison for so-called security offences. There's clearly a lot to discuss here. Let's introduce today's guests. In Tehran, Fawad Izzadi, a political science professor at the University of Tehran. Joining us from Washington is Geneive Abdo, a non-resident fellow at the Stimson Center for Middle East Policy at the Brookings Institution. And in Jerusalem is Alan Leal, former Director General of the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs and now Professor of International Relations at Tel Aviv University. Welcome all of you to the programme. Fawad, can I start with you? Rouhani has promised a more open and moderate approach to international affairs. He made that promise during his election campaign. Are we now seeing the start of that?
As you said, this is the theme that he had when he was running for president. He repeated this theme of moderation over and over at different campaign stops. And then he won the presidency with the backing of Iranian people. And he's basically delivering on that promise, and the steps that you mentioned at the beginning of the program are just signs of that. So I think the Iranian government is genuinely interested in resolving issues that it has with the United States and a number of Western governments. And this trip that Dr. Rouhani is making to New York is going to be quite significant, because a lot of people are watching this in Tehran, and they seem to be thinking that the ball is in the U.S. court, and the U.S. government should take this opportunity and use it to basically resolve these issues if they're genuinely interested in resolving these issues. And we just have to wait and see how it's going to work out.
Yes, so the US clearly waiting to see, listening very closely to see if this is a sincere offer. Alan, Israel's view on this, because Israel will also be listening very closely to see if this is a sincere offer.
I like the music coming out of Tehran recently. But as you know, suspicions in Israel run very high. Our Prime Minister ran almost an international career on the issue of Iran being an a dangerous enemy of Israel and to the world. And I think here, in fact, there is one personality that will decide if Israel is believing Tehran or not, and this is Benjamin Netanyahu, based also on the intelligence information that he will get from our sources, Israeli sources. I think we have good abilities to understand what's going on inside Iran.
So do you think Benjamin Netanyahu will believe? Do you think he will believe the message? The message from Rouhani is, we have never sought nuclear weapons. We won't give mixed signals. Will Benjamin Netanyahu believe that?
So far he does not. So far he does not. There is a feeling that Iran is trying to drag time to alleviate the sanctions and so on. But I think what will determine is if there is hardcore, concrete information coming out of Iran that Iran is changing its policies. And I think the Prime Minister, first of all, will rely on the intelligence that the Israeli authorities will gather inside Iran on this matter. Also, you have to remember that we have a Syrian test case with the chemical weapons right ahead of us. And I think what will happen in Syria will also affect at least the mood in Israel, the public mood regarding coming developments in Iran.
Okay. Geneive, what's your view on this? Because clearly there's a lot of road to travel before Iran and the US have a proper warm and friendly relationship. But are the first steps being taken by Iran, do you think?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that Washington is somewhere in the middle of these two perspectives that we've just heard, one from Iran and one from Israel. As you mentioned in your report, the Obama administration has been cautious. I think that, of course, President Obama would like to see movement. But let me also say that, you know, we're seeing things in Iran that we haven't seen before. And rather than speculate, obviously, we're a week before President Rouhani will speak at the UN, but we don't need to wait too long and speculate, because if he does not, for example, offer to limit uranium enrichment, if he does not offer more transparency on the nuclear program, if he does not put forth very concrete actions that the Iranians are going to take, then of course we don't have to speculate any longer. But I think so far there is some evidence. As you mentioned, he's released political prisoners. He's already started an economic reform program in Iran. He has said very publicly that his administration's priority is sanction relief. And as we know, the Iranians are suffering tremendously due to sanctions. Their sales of oil have plummeted dramatically by almost 50% since sanctions took effect. They're suffering in many respects because of the sanctions. So I think that what's happened actually is that those in the United States who pushed for sanctions, and I'm not necessarily saying that I agree with this policy, but they are seeing now that perhaps the sanctions actually achieved what the U.S. government hoped for, and that was internal reform in Iran in terms of their domestic policies, and also some movement with the relationship with the United States. And I'd like to make one last point, and that is Syria, as was mentioned a few moments ago. We're even seeing now in Tehran over the last week or so comments from high-level Iranian officials saying things such as, Assad does not need to stay in power forever. That was one quote from someone. Another official said that Syria needs to reform. So I think that the Iranians are quite serious now, and they understand the relationship between supporting Assad and the sanctions. So that's why I think they're Yeah, sorry. Anyway, I think they're deliberately trying to work two different issues.
All right, I just want to give our viewers some background on Hassan Rouhani. He's a former activist, lawyer and academic who's earned the nickname the Diplomatic Sheikh. The Muslim cleric has been an influential figure in Iranian politics since the 1979 revolution. Rouhani has twice served as National Security Advisor. He's perhaps best known for his role as Iran's top nuclear negotiator. Back in 2005, he made a huge concession to the West by offering to suspend nuclear enrichment. His presidential campaign spoke of moderation and wisdom, promising reforms and efforts to ease sanctions. Former British Foreign Secretary Jack Straw said of him, he's someone we can do business with. Fouad, can I get your reaction on Geneve's point that there is a perception that it is the fact that sanctions were imposed on Iran and have caused an impact on Iran that has led to this point where we are now seeing changes in Iran and a more moderate president being elected?
I think Geneive is right with regard to sanction hurting ordinary citizens in Iran. And we are seeing a shortage of medicine in certain segments, and we are seeing also inflation that is hurting ordinary citizens. So yes, the answer is sanctions are hurting Iranian people, and the Iranian government obviously needs to find a way of relieving these sanctions. But I don't think sanctions will achieve the goal that they had, which was give Iran an ultimatum and change Iran's behavior in terms of giving up its international rights with regard to, for example, enrichment of uranium, which is allowed under international law. And I don't think anybody in the world will take the statements that is coming from Tel Aviv very seriously. The Israeli government has been predicting that Iran will have a nuclear bomb the next year since 1992. In 1992, they said they will have it in 93, and then in 95, and then so every other year they're predicting that
Fouad,
Iran will have a nuclear weapon.
Sorry to interrupt. Can I ask you, Fouad, if it wasn't sanctions that brought us to this point, why is Rouhani now offering to talk about its nuclear program with the US?
You know, in Iran, we have different political parties. The political party that Mr. Ahmadinejad belonged to believe that the West is not genuine with regard to its claim of just worrying about Iran's nuclear program. The belief that that particular party had was that the West wants to overthrow the Iranian government, and the nuclear issue is just an excuse. And no matter what you do on the nuclear portfolio, the West will find some other excuse to pressure Iran politically and economically. Dr. Rouhani does not belong to that camp, does not belong to that political party. The political party that he belongs to thinks that he and Iran overall can manage the nuclear portfolio, and they basically think that they can get these sanctions removed from Iran if they just do a better job diplomatically. And he's trying to do that.
Let me get Alan's reaction to this, because Israel, of course, described Rouhani when he was elected as a wolf in sheep's clothing. So presumably Israel is very worried about any process which will eventually remove sanctions from Iran, because it's worried about what its end goal is, which is pretty ironic given that Israel actually does possess nuclear weapons.
First, I must make clear, although I was many years with the government, I'm not speaking for the Israeli government anymore. I left the government. So again, for me, the change in Tehran, even of the rhetorics, is very welcomed, very welcome. Nobody in Israel, nobody misses Ahmadinejad. And by the way, the speech in the UN, the coming speech, is extremely important, because the speeches Ahmadinejad had in the UN were very traumatic. And to see the president of Iran with a different rhetoric, with a different style, maybe even approaching directly the people of the United States, and maybe, who knows, the people of Israel, above the head of our Prime Minister will be very, very welcomed. But the feeling of most of the people is still that this is another Iranian trick, because don't forget, the Prime Minister of Israel, with his abilities, rhetoric abilities, convinced the Israeli public that this is the #1 national goal of Iran, seeking nuclear weapons, and #2, destroying Israel. He worked on it for years, and a lot of people here really believe in it.
Geneive, there's clearly a lot of mistrust to get over with Israel. What does Iran need to do to prove its good intentions to both Israel and the US?
Well, I do agree that Iran has a credibility problem. Obviously, we don't need to rehash the whole history of how they deceived various international bodies about their nuclear program. However, having said that, I think that we have to get away from this notion that's very simplistic of the Iranian political system. You know, all of these leaders are not just sort of cartoon characters who are on automatic pilot. I mean, as Fawad said, there are different political parties. They have different programs. They have different policies. And we are seeing that with the election of President Rouhani, who is actually a protege of former President Rafsanjani, who had a very good relationship with the West, this is why we are seeing these changes. So I think that we have to not assume that because former President Ahmadinejad had wanted the destruction of Israel, that that's still the policy of the current government. I do think, though, that, as I said a few minutes ago, that Iran needs to put something on the table that's concrete, and then we can really know if the statements, the very positive statements, the positive changes are fundamental or if they're just cosmetic.
And of course, the real power in Iran is the supreme leader, and any final decisions on the nuclear program will be made by him. But Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has also recently showed that he is also being conciliatory.
We don't want nuclear weapons, not because of pressure from US or other, but because of our belief that no one should have nuclear weapons. When we say no one should have nuclear weapons, that means not for them and not for us either.
Fawad, it's really interesting because Khamenei has also spoken about compromise and about what he called heroic flexibility. Are we seeing a change in his position too?
Yes, I think definitely the speech that Ayatollah Khamenei had yesterday had a new message, and the message was that Iran is very much willing to compromise and be flexible with regard to its nuclear program, other issues of concern, and he actually is providing this message right before Dr. Rouhani is going to New York.
But how far can Rouhani go?
To the other side.
What kind of permission has Khamenei given Rouhani? What has he given Rouhani permission to offer?
This is the public permission. This is why it's significant. It's a public permission that Rouhani has full authority to reach a compromise. And he's not only doing that in private and telling him this, he's making a speech about it and is quite forward with regard to the issue of compromise and being
but
flexible.
Compromise,
so
how far to compromise? And for
important.
example, will he allow surprise visits by UN inspectors? Will he freeze uranium enrichment? How far is he prepared to go?
You know, Iran has been visited by UN inspectors for many years. They are monitoring Iran's nuclear program 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They come and go all the time. It's not that Iran is not allowing them. Iran is not North Korea. Iran is not Israel, that it does not allow UN inspectors to enter a country. And for Iran's nuclear program, I suggest your viewers go and read the testimony of James Clapper. He is the Director of National Intelligence in the United States. He's the leader of all these intelligence communities there. And he had a testimony in March of this year at U.S. Senate Intelligence Committee. And in that testimony, he says that not only Iran does not have a nuclear bomb. He says that he's not sure if Iranian leaders have decided to make one, which begs the question, if that is the case, why the U.S. is hurting Iranian people by sanctioning them so hardly. Anyway, that is, I think, the point that your viewers may want to get. And the point is that Iranian leaders are saying that we are not making a nuclear bomb. The U.S. is not claiming Iran has one, and the U.S. is saying that the issue is not even set to make a nuclear bomb. Iran has not decided to make a nuclear weapon.
And I think given let me bring Alan in, because I can see that he wants to say something. Alan, what's your view?
I think these worries in Israel, or the fear even in Israel, in the last decade was based on, one, the technical abilities of Iran to be able to manufacture a bomb that will be used against Israel. And the second thing, the type of leadership that Iran is having. Nobody had to convince us that the leadership that Iran had until recently is an extremely irresponsible leadership, anti-Semitic and so on. So if you combine the technical possibility that is around the corner to acquire a bomb, to build a bomb, with this irresponsible leadership, you are frightened to death. Now, if you remove even only the 50% of the leadership, and you can convince the West and the Israeli people that Iran has a different leadership, a responsible leadership that is not anti-Semitic, that is not after destroying the state of Israel, then you remove 50% of the problem. We have seen now in the United States and in Europe, when the public doesn't want the leaders to attack, the message goes through. If the Israeli public will be convinced that the new leadership in Iran is after a different policy, is not willing to destroy Israel, and in addition to it, there will be some guarantees about the nuclear abilities, then the public mood will change here, and even the government will have to change its policies.
Okay, we're coming very quickly towards the end of the program. Geneive, let me ask you quickly, do you think that Rouhani is going to be able to address some of these concerns? He's obviously aware of these concerns and fears from Israel as well when he talks to the General Assembly on Tuesday?
I think that if you examine what he said in yesterday's interview and in some of the other interviews, he's very direct in his comments. I mean, even his comments, of course, about Iran's lack of desire to create nuclear weapons. I mean, he's very direct. He knows what the sensitive issues are. He knows what the progress the West wants to see. So I think that all we're seeing now is in preparation for probably a very direct, honest, and very open speech that he will give at the UN that should assure and give the kinds of assurances that Israel, I think, is looking for. So I think that that's what we can expect when he does speak at the UN. Do
you think we're going to see a meeting on the sidelines between Rouhani and Obama?
Maybe not between Obama and Rouhani, but certainly between Secretary of State Kerry and his counterpart, Mr. Zarif, and some other people. I mean, it's assumed in Washington now that there will be high-level talks between the U.S. and Iran on the sidelines of the General Assembly.
Final word to Fouad. Is there a sense in Iran that there is going to be a change in the relationship between Iran and the US, and that this could lead to improvements for people in Iran?
Yes, as I said, there is a camp, and this camp has its own public opinion following, that has seen repeated misbehavior by the Israeli government, by the US government toward the Iranian people, and it's difficult for them to accept that the US government and the Israeli government are going to change course just because we have a new president. So we have that segment of the population. Another segment is more hopeful. They basically accept the idea that the US wants to reach some sort of compromise, and given the fact that Iran is ready to compromise, they are more hopeful than the first camp.
Okay, I know there is lots more to discuss on this subject and we'd all like to keep going, but I'm afraid that we've come to the end of the programme. So can I give a big thank you to all my guests today, Fouad Izzadi, Geneive Abdo and Alan Leal. Now we're on Facebook, facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, and you can find details of all our programmes. Do feel free to like us. I'm Shuli Ghosh. Thanks for watching. Till next time. Bye-bye.